CEO Billionaire fired his secretary, only to realize she was the one woman he couldn't live without. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew the storm was coming before he did. Alicia Bennett smoothed her navy blazer and checked her reflection in the elevator's polished steel doors. 26 years old, with rich mahogany skin that caught the light just right and natural curls pulled back in a sleek low bun, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in the world. Her dark brown eyes held intelligence and warmth, though today they carried a hint of exhaustion. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 42nd floor of the Walker Enterprises building in Manhattan. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park stretched out like a green oasis in the concrete jungle, but Alicia barely noticed. Her mind was already running through Daniel's schedule: 9 a.m. board meeting, 10:30 conference call with Tokyo investors, lunch with the mayor's office, and a crucial 3 p.m. presentation that could make or break the Hudson River project. She'd been Daniel Walker's executive assistant for 3 years. 3 years of anticipating his needs before he voiced them, of knowing exactly how he liked his coffee, black, no sugar, served in his lucky ceramic mug, and of being the calm eye in the hurricane of his demanding world. "Morning, Alicia," called Janet from reception, her Brooklyn accent cutting through the morning quiet. "He's already asking for you. Something about the Morrison contracts." Alicia's heart skipped. The Morrison contracts weren't due until next week. She'd specifically confirmed the timeline yesterday. "Thanks, Janet." Alicia's voice remained steady, but her pulse quickened as she walked toward the executive suite. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, a sound that usually comforted her with its familiarity. Today it felt like a countdown. Daniel's office occupied the entire corner of the building, its glass walls offering a commanding view of the city. Inside, she could see him pacing behind his mahogany desk, phone pressed to his ear. Even in his agitation, he was magnetic, 6'2" with an athletic build that his tailored charcoal suits couldn't hide. His dark hair was perfectly styled, save for the single strand that had fallen across his forehead, the way it did when he was stressed. His steel grey eyes were focused, intense, the kind that could make board members squirm or make a woman's heart race. Not that Alicia would ever admit to the latter. She knocked gently on the doorframe and stepped inside. The scent of his cologne, something expensive and distinctly masculine, mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee. Her coffee, prepared exactly the way he liked it, waiting on his desk. "I need the Morrison contracts now," he said without looking up, ending his call with a sharp tap. His voice was clipped, professional, but she could hear the undercurrent of frustration. "Mr. Walker, the Morrison deadline isn't until—" "I know what I said." He finally looked at her, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression, something almost vulnerable, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Plans changed. Morrison wants to move up the meeting. We need those contracts revised and sent by noon." Alicia felt her stomach drop. The contracts were complex, requiring input from legal, finance, and 3 different department heads. Getting them revised in 3 hours would be like performing surgery with a stopwatch ticking. "I'll make it happen," she said, already mentally reorganizing her entire day. This was what she did. She made the impossible possible, one crisis at a time. "Good." Daniel picked up his coffee mug, pausing as the familiar taste hit his tongue. For just a second, his shoulders relaxed. "Also, the Yamamoto presentation needs to be moved to 2 p.m. Something about a scheduling conflict in Tokyo. I'll coordinate with his assistant and update your calendar." Alicia was already typing notes on her tablet. "Should I reschedule your lunch with Mayor Davidson?" "No." Daniel set down his coffee and looked out at the city. "We can't afford to postpone that. The permits for the Hudson project are hanging in the balance." Alicia nodded, though inside she was calculating the impossibility of fitting everything in. She'd have to call in favors, work through lunch, and probably stay late again. But that was the job. That was her job. "Anything else, Mr. Walker?" He turned back to her, and for a moment his expression softened. "You look tired, Alicia. Are you getting enough sleep?" The question caught her off guard. In 3 years, Daniel Walker had never asked about her personal well-being. He noticed if she was efficient, if she was punctual, if she anticipated his needs. He didn't notice if she looked tired. "I'm fine," she said quickly, professional mask sliding back into place. "Just focused on getting everything done." "Right." He picked up a stack of papers, the moment of unexpected intimacy dissolving. "That's what I pay you for." Something in his tone stung, but Alicia kept her expression neutral. "I'll get started on the Morrison contracts immediately." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Alicia?" "Yes, Mr. Walker." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something else. Instead, he simply nodded toward his coffee mug. "Thank you." "For the coffee. It's perfect as always." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. Ridiculous, really, over something so simple. "You're welcome." As she walked back to her desk, Alicia tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach. 3 years of working for Daniel Walker had taught her many things, but the most important was this. She was hopelessly, impossibly, completely in love with a man who saw her as nothing more than the perfect assistant. She sat down at her desk and opened her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard, as she began the delicate dance of rearranging an impossible day. Around her, the office hummed with the energy of a new morning, conversations drifting from nearby cubicles, the soft ping of incoming emails. But all Alicia could think about was the way Daniel had looked at her when he asked if she was tired, as if, for just a moment, he had seen her as more than his incredibly efficient executive assistant. As if he had seen her as a woman. She shook her head and focused on her screen. Dangerous thoughts like those led nowhere good. Daniel Walker was her boss, nothing more. And she was his assistant, brilliant, dependable, and completely invisible to him in any way that mattered. At least that's what she told herself, as she began typing the first of many emails she'd need to send to make his impossible day possible. She had no idea that by the end of this day, everything would change forever. Some mistakes cost more than just a job. By 11:45 a.m., Alicia had worked miracles. The legal team had fast-tracked the Morrison contract revisions, the finance department had approved the budget amendments, and she'd managed to coordinate with 3 department heads who normally took weeks to respond to emails. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she compiled the final document, double-checking every clause, every number, every signature line. The office buzzed with its usual energy. Through the glass walls of Daniel's office, she could see him on a video call with the Tokyo investors, his hands gesturing as he spoke. Even in the middle of high-stakes negotiations, he commanded attention. His presence filled the room. His voice carried authority that made people listen. Alicia's phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister, Maya. "Still coming to dinner Sunday? Mum's making her famous jerk chicken." She smiled despite her stress. Family dinners at her childhood home in Brooklyn were her sanctuary. Her mother's warm kitchen, her father's terrible jokes, Maya's endless stories about her nursing school adventures. It was the one place where she wasn't Daniel Walker's indispensable assistant. She was just Alicia. "Wouldn't miss it," she typed back quickly, then returned to the Morrison contracts. 11:52 a.m. She had 8 minutes to send the documents and make Daniel's impossible deadline possible. Again. She attached the files to the email, typed Morrison's address from memory, and crafted a professional message explaining the revisions. Her cursor hovered over the send button for just a moment, a habit she'd developed after 3 years of handling million-dollar communications. Everything looked perfect. She clicked send. The email whooshed away into cyberspace, and Alicia exhaled for the first time in hours. Another crisis averted, another impossible deadline met. She glanced at Daniel's office, hoping to catch his eye and give him a subtle thumbs up, but he was still deep in conversation with Tokyo. Her phone rang. "Alicia Bennett, Mr. Walker's office." "Alicia, it's Robert Morrison." The voice on the other end was tense, confused. "I just received your email, but I think there might be some confusion. The contracts you sent, they're for the Henderson project, not our Morrison development." The words hit her like ice water. Alicia's eyes flew to her computer screen, her heart hammering as she opened her sent folder. There it was, the email to Morrison sent 7 minutes ago, with the wrong contracts attached. She'd been so focused on the deadline, so concerned with getting everything done perfectly, that she'd grabbed the wrong file. The Henderson contracts, confidential documents for a completely different project, one that Morrison's company was actually competing against. "Mr. Morrison, Alicia's voice caught. In 3 years, she had never made a mistake like this. Never. "I'm sending these back to you immediately," Morrison continued, his tone professional but clearly uncomfortable. "I assume this was an error, but you should know that I've seen confidential information I shouldn't have access to." "Yes, sir. I'll handle this right away. Thank you for your discretion." Alicia hung up and immediately began damage control, her hands shaking as she typed. She sent the correct Morrison contracts, flagged the incident for the legal team, and prepared an incident report. But even as she worked, she knew the damage was done. She'd just sent confidential information about a multi-million-dollar project to a competing company. The Tokyo call ended, and Daniel stepped out of his office, loosening his tie slightly. He looked satisfied, the way he always did after a successful negotiation. "The Tokyo deal is locked in," he said as he approached her desk. $300 million in funding for the next phase. Morrison contract sent. Alicia stood up slowly, her mouth dry. "Mr. Walker, I need to speak with you about the Morrison situation." Something in her tone made him stop, his grey eyes sharpened, focusing on her with laser intensity. "What kind of situation?" I made an error with the email. I accidentally sent them the Henderson contracts instead of theirs." The color drained from Daniel's face. Around them, the office continued its normal rhythm, but Alicia felt like they were in a bubble of sudden, terrible silence. "You sent confidential Henderson documents to Morrison?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Yes, but Morrison immediately returned them and assured me—" "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Daniel's voice rose slightly, and several heads turned in their direction. "Morrison is Henderson's biggest competitor. Those contracts contain pricing strategies, timeline information, supplier details. I know. I've already contacted legal and you've potentially compromised a $50 million project." Daniel's composure was cracking, his professional mask slipping to reveal the cold fury beneath. 3 years, Alicia. 3 years of perfect work. And you choose today when everything matters, to make a mistake like this. Alicia felt her eyes burn with unshed tears, but she kept her voice steady. "It was an honest mistake, Mr. Walker. I was moving quickly to meet your deadline." "My deadline?" His laugh was harsh, bitter. "Don't you dare blame this on me. I pay you to be perfect. I pay you to be better than this." The words hit her like physical blows. Around them, the office had gone quiet, conversations stopping as people sensed the tension radiating from the executive suite. "I understand you're upset." "Upset?" Daniel's voice carried across the office now, and Alicia felt every eye in the building turning toward them. "I'm not upset, Alicia. I'm done with excuses, done with mistakes, done with assistants who can't handle the pressure of real responsibility." The words she dreaded, the words that had haunted her nightmares, hung in the air between them. "Mr. Walker, please." "You're fired." The words echoed through the office like a gunshot. Alicia felt the world tilt, her vision blurring at the edges. 3 years of perfect service, 3 years of devotion, 3 years of love she'd never been able to express, all ending with 2 simple words. "Effective immediately," Daniel continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the floor. "Security will escort you out. I want your access cards, your company phone, and any confidential materials on your desk." Alicia looked around the office. Her office, the place that had been her second home for 3 years. Janet at reception had her hand over her mouth. Marcus from accounting was staring openly. Even the cleaning staff had stopped their work to watch the scene unfold. But worse than all of it was the look in Daniel's eyes. Cold, distant, as if the 3 years they'd worked together meant nothing. As if she meant nothing. "I'll pack my things," she said quietly, her voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Security will handle that. I want you out of this building in 10 minutes. He turned and walked back toward his office, not once looking back at her. The man who had just destroyed her life with 2 words continued on as if nothing had happened. Alicia stood there for a moment, surrounded by the shocked faces of her colleagues, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. Then, with dignity she didn't know she possessed, she picked up her purse, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the elevator. The security guard who escorted her down was kind, Marcus, who'd always smiled at her in the mornings. He didn't speak, just walked beside her with quiet respect. As the elevator descended, carrying her away from the life she'd built, away from the man she'd loved in silence, Alicia finally allowed herself one moment of weakness. She closed her eyes and let a single tear fall. Control was an illusion he'd spent 37 years perfecting. Daniel Walker stood at his office window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the ant-like people 42 floors below navigate the Manhattan streets. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his face, but he barely noticed. His reflection in the glass showed a man in perfect control, expensive suit unwrinkled, hair still perfectly styled, expression calm and authoritative. It was all a lie. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee mug, the same ceramic cup Alicia had filled for him that morning. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it out. Something about the lipstick stain on the rim. Wait, that wasn't right. Alicia never wore lipstick to work. She preferred a subtle gloss that made her smile seem even warmer. He shook his head. Why was he thinking about her smile? The office felt different without her presence. Too quiet, too empty. Even the sound of phones ringing and keyboards clicking seemed muted, as if the entire floor was holding its breath. Mr. Walker? The voice belonged to Jennifer Hastings, the temp from the agency who'd arrived 2 hours after Alicia left. She was competent enough. Harvard MBA, 5 years experience, impeccable references, everything he should want in an assistant. But she wasn't Alicia. What is it, Jennifer? He didn't turn around. The Morrison contracts were successfully resent, and their legal team confirmed receipt. No issues reported. Her voice was crisp, professional. Also, your 4 p.m. appointment is here. Daniel frowned. What 4 p.m. appointment? A pause. With Henderson Industries? About the Riverside Development Project? Ice formed in Daniel's stomach. The Henderson meeting wasn't until tomorrow. He'd specifically scheduled it for tomorrow because today was already impossible, packed with the Morrison crisis and the Tokyo negotiations. That meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Sir, I'm showing it on your calendar for today at 4 p.m. Mr. Henderson's been waiting in the conference room for 10 minutes. Daniel finally turned around, his grey eyes sharp with frustration. Jennifer stood in his doorway, tablet in hand, looking professionally apologetic, but slightly confused. She was attractive in a conventional way. Blonde, blue-eyed, the kind of woman who belonged on magazine covers. Everything was perfect about her except for one crucial detail. She wasn't Alicia, who would have known his schedule better than he did. Who would have caught the error before it happened? Who would have handled Henderson with charm and efficiency, while making sure Daniel never looked unprepared? Reschedule it, he said curtly. Sir, Mr. Henderson flew in from Chicago specifically for this meeting. If I may suggest, handle it. Daniel's voice carried the edge that usually made people scramble to comply. Jennifer nodded and disappeared, but not before he caught the flash of irritation in her eyes. Alone again, Daniel loosened his tie and sat heavily in his leather chair. The Henderson project was worth $50 million, the same project that had been compromised by Alicia's mistake. The irony wasn't lost on him. His computer chimed with an email notification. Without Alicia filtering his inbox, he was drowning in messages, vendor inquiries, meeting requests, reminders about things she used to handle seamlessly. He'd already missed 2 phone calls because Jennifer didn't know which ones to prioritize. The door opened again, and his brother Marcus entered without knocking, a privilege only family enjoyed. Heard you fired your assistant today? Marcus said, settling into one of the leather chairs across from Daniel's desk. At 34, Marcus was 3 years younger, but carried himself with the same Walker confidence. However, where Daniel was all sharp edges and controlled intensity, Marcus had an easier warmth that made people trust him instantly. News travels fast. When you humiliate someone publicly in front of 50 employees, yeah, it does. Marcus's tone was carefully neutral, but Daniel caught the undercurrent of disapproval. She made a critical error, sent confidential Henderson documents to Morrison Industries. So you destroyed her career over one mistake? Daniel's jaw tightened. It wasn't just any mistake, Marcus. 3 years of work could have been compromised. $50 million. Was Morrison Industries going to steal your project based on one accidental email? Did they even look at the documents? That's not the point, isn't it? Marcus leaned forward, his brown eyes, so like their mother's, studying Daniel intently. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you punished someone for being human. For making one error after 3 years of perfect service. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing to the window again. Below, traffic crawled through the streets like blood through arteries, the city's heartbeat continuing regardless of his personal crisis. You don't understand the pressure. I understand pressure, Daniel. I also understand loyalty. And from what I've observed, Alicia Bennett was the most loyal employee this company has ever had. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd been trying not to think about her for the past 4 hours, trying to focus on damage control and moving forward. But Marcus saying her name brought back the image of her face when he'd fired her, the way her dark eyes had gone wide with shock, then quickly shuttered to hide her pain. She's been replaced. Has she? Marcus gestured toward the stack of messages on Daniel's desk. Because it looks like your day fell apart the moment she walked out that door. Daniel didn't respond, because Marcus was right. Without Alicia, his perfectly ordered world had tilted off its axis. The temp was competent, but she didn't know that he liked his afternoon coffee at exactly 2:30 p.m., or that he needed 15 minutes of silence before major presentations, or that when he got that particular look in his eyes, it meant he was about to make a decision that would change everything. "Why do you care so much about my assistant situation?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "Because I've watched you for 3 years, brother, and the only time I've ever seen you genuinely happy, not successful, not satisfied, but happy, is when you're talking to her." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Daniel felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd spent decades building. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? When's the last time you smiled, Daniel? Really smiled, not that corporate politician smile you use in meetings. When's the last time you laughed?" Daniel couldn't answer, because the truth was too dangerous to voice. The last time had been 2 weeks ago, when Alicia had brought him coffee and accidentally knocked over his pen holder. She'd scrambled to clean up the mess, apologizing profusely, and he'd found himself genuinely amused by her flustered efficiency. She'd looked up at him, cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and he'd smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. "I don't have time for this conversation." Marcus stood, adjusting his jacket. "Maybe not, but you might want to ask yourself what you're really afraid of. Because from where I'm standing, it's not making mistakes or losing control of your business." "Then what?" Marcus paused at the door, looking back with eyes that saw too much. "You're afraid of needing someone, and you just fired the one person who made you feel less alone." After Marcus left, Daniel sat in the growing darkness of his office, not bothering to turn on the lights. The city twinkled to life below him, millions of people going about their evening routines. Somewhere out there, Alicia was probably at home, maybe crying, maybe angry, maybe both. For the first time in years, Daniel Walker, master of the universe, ruler of his empire, felt completely and utterly alone. And somewhere deep in his chest, something that felt dangerously like regret began to bloom. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to break. Alicia's apartment in Brooklyn Heights was small but warm, filled with photos of family and friends, books stacked on every surface, and the kind of lived-in comfort that came from actually enjoying your home. Sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, casting gentle patterns across the hardwood floors as she sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, coffee growing cold beside her. 3 days had passed since the worst moment of her professional life. 3 days of sleeping until noon, of ignoring her phone, of alternating between fury and heartbreak. 3 days of her mother calling every few hours to check on her, of Maya dropping by with ice cream and terrible romantic comedies, of her father texting awkward but sweet messages of support. But this morning was different. This morning, Alicia Bennett was done feeling sorry for herself. She'd showered, styled her natural curls in loose waves that framed her face beautifully, and put on her favorite burgundy sweater, the one that made her feel confident and powerful. Her dark eyes, which had been red-rimmed and dull for days, now sparked with determination. Her laptop displayed job listings from Indeed, LinkedIn, and executive placement agencies. The phone had been ringing all morning. Word traveled fast in Manhattan's business circles, and apparently being fired by Daniel Walker was less of a career killer than she'd feared. If anything, it seemed to make her more desirable to his competitors. "Alicia Bennett speaking," she answered on the third ring, her voice warm and professional. "Ms. Bennett, this is Catherine Morrison from Morrison Industries." The voice was crisp, authoritative. "I believe you know who we are." Alicia's heart skipped. Morrison Industries, the company that had received the wrong contracts, the catalyst for her downfall. "Yes, Mrs. Morrison, how can I help you?" "I'd like to offer you a job." The words hung in the air for a moment. Alicia set down her coffee cup carefully, her mind racing. "I'm flattered, but I'm not sure that would be appropriate given the recent circumstances." Catherine's laugh was warm, genuine. "Ms. Bennett, in 20 years of business, I've never had a competitor's employee call me within minutes of making an error. To personally ensure damage control, most people would have tried to cover it up or blame someone else. Your integrity in that moment told me everything I need to know about your character." Alicia felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the ones she'd shed over the past 3 days. These were tears of relief, of validation. "What kind of position are you offering?" "Executive Operations Manager. You'd be working directly with me to oversee our expansion into the mid-Atlantic market. Here it's a step up from assistant work, more responsibility, more autonomy, and considerably better compensation than whatever Walker was paying you. Alicia's pulse quickened. Operations manager. It was the kind of position she'd dreamed about, but never dared to pursue while working for Daniel. He'd kept her so busy being indispensable that she'd never had time to think about her own career advancement. I'd like to hear more. Wonderful. Can you come in this afternoon? Say 2 p.m. Our offices are in Midtown, just a few blocks from Walker Enterprises, actually. After hanging up, Alicia sat back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Maya's contact. Big sister. Maya's voice was bright, energetic. Please tell me you're calling with good news and not asking me to bring more tissues. Morrison Industries just offered me a job. Shut up, are you serious? The same Morrison from the contract thing? The very same operations manager position. Better title, better pay, and... Alicia grinned. It's just a few blocks from Walker Enterprises. Maya's delighted laugh echoed through the phone. Oh, this is too perfect. Daniel Walker is going to see you succeeding every single day. I love it. What are you going to wear? Alicia was already mentally cataloguing her wardrobe. The navy power suit. The one with the fitted blazer. The one that makes you look like you could run the world. That's the one. After Maya hung up, promising to call their parents with the good news, Alicia allowed herself a few minutes to simply breathe. For 3 days, she'd felt like her world had ended. Now, sitting in her sunny kitchen with a real opportunity in front of her, she realized something important. Daniel Walker hadn't destroyed her career. He'd freed her from a job where she'd been invisible, undervalued, and in love with a man who saw her as nothing more than an efficient machine. She thought about the past 3 years, all the late nights she'd stayed to finish his projects, all the weekends she'd spent coordinating his personal travel, all the time she'd rearranged her own life to accommodate his needs. She'd been so busy being the perfect assistant that she'd forgotten to build her own dreams. Well, no more. Alicia opened her laptop and began researching Morrison Industries. If she was going to walk into that interview, she was going to be prepared, she was going to be brilliant, and she was going to show them exactly why letting Daniel Walker fire her was the best thing that had ever happened to her career. 2 hours later, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blazer. The woman looking back at her was polished, professional, and confident. Her natural curls were styled in a sophisticated updo. Her makeup was flawless but not overdone, and her dark eyes held a spark of ambition that had been missing for too long. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard about Morrison. Congratulations. You deserve better than Walker ever gave you. Janet. More messages followed. From Marcus in accounting, from several colleagues, even from the security guard who'd escorted her out. The support was overwhelming and humbling. She'd spent 3 years thinking she was just Daniel's assistant, but apparently she'd made more of an impact than she'd realized. As she grabbed her purse and headed for the subway, Alicia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about her own future. Not about making someone else's impossible dreams come true, but about building something for herself. The train ride into Manhattan gave her time to think, to plan, to prepare. She watched the familiar neighborhoods blur past the windows and realized she wasn't the same woman who'd ridden this route every morning for 3 years. That woman had been content to live in someone else's shadow. This woman was ready to step into the light. As the train pulled into the station, Alicia's phone buzzed one more time. Another unknown number. Good luck today. You've got this. M.W. Marcus Walker. Daniel's brother had somehow heard about her interview and taken the time to send encouragement. The gesture touched her more than she expected. She typed back quickly, "Thank you. That means a lot." Then she slipped her phone into her purse, straightened her shoulders, and walked up the subway steps into the bright afternoon sun. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Walker was probably struggling through another day without his perfect assistant. But Alicia Bennett was no longer interested in being anyone's second choice. He had built an empire on precision, but precision meant nothing without the right person to execute it. Daniel stared at the coffee stain spreading across his mahogany desk, the dark liquid seeping into important documents and pooling around his laptop. Jennifer stood frozen beside his chair, her face pale with mortification, a stack of soggy papers dripping in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Walker. The coffee cup slipped when I was reaching for the Henderson files and just clean it up." Daniel's voice was eerily calm, which somehow made it worse than if he'd shouted. He stood slowly, watching months of work dissolving into brown splotches on white paper. It was Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week since Alicia had walked out of his life. 1 week of disaster after disaster. Jennifer scrambled to grab paper towels from the small kitchenette in his office, but the damage was done. The Henderson presentation materials, the Morrison contract revisions, 3 department reports, all ruined. With Alicia, something like this would never have happened. She moved around his office like a dancer, anticipating obstacles, never crowding his space, never making mistakes. Jennifer, despite her MBA and impressive resume, seemed to collide with his world rather than flowing through it. "Mr. Walker." The voice belonged to Thomas Chen, his head of legal. Thomas stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "We need to discuss the Patterson merger. There's been a development." Daniel stepped around the coffee disaster and gestured for Thomas to sit. "What kind of development?" "The kind that should have been on your calendar. Patterson's legal team flew in from Seattle for the final negotiations. They've been waiting in conference room A for 45 minutes. Ice formed in Daniel's stomach. The Patterson merger was worth $200 million. It was supposed to be scheduled for next week, not today. "Jennifer," his voice cut through the sound of her frantic cleaning. "Check my calendar." She fumbled with her tablet, her hands still shaking from the coffee incident. "Sir, Oh God, the Patterson meeting is here. Today at 2 p.m. But yesterday you told me it was next Friday, so I didn't prepare any of the materials." Daniel closed his eyes. Alicia would have caught the discrepancy. She would have prepared backup materials. She would have called Patterson's team to confirm, double-checked with legal, and made sure every detail was perfect. "How long have they been waiting?" he asked Thomas. "An hour now. They're not happy." Daniel looked around his office. Coffee-stained papers scattered everywhere, his assistant on the verge of tears, his legal counsel looking at him with barely concealed concern. This wasn't how Daniel Walker conducted business. This wasn't the image he'd spent 15 years building. "Give me 5 minutes to change clothes and grab the backup files from my safe. Then we'll salvage what we can." After Thomas left, Daniel loosened his coffee-stained tie and reached for a clean shirt from the closet he kept in his office. As he changed, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot from too many late nights, and there were stress lines around his mouth that hadn't been there a week ago. He looked like a man losing control. "Mr. Walker." Jennifer's voice was small, tentative. "I've cleaned up most of the coffee, but some of the documents are completely illegible. Should I call the departments to request new copies?" "No time." Daniel's reflection stared back at him accusingly. "We'll work with what we have." The Patterson meeting was a disaster. Without proper preparation, Daniel found himself fumbling through explanations, unable to provide the detailed financial projections they expected, stumbling over questions that Alicia would have anticipated and briefed him on. Patterson's CEO, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Reynolds, watched him with growing confusion. "Daniel, I have to ask, is everything all right? This isn't the level of preparation we've come to expect from Walker Enterprises." The words hit him like a physical blow. His reputation, built over years of flawless execution, was crumbling in real time. "We've had some recent transitions in our support staff," he managed. "I apologize for today's inconsistencies." After Patterson's team left with promises to reconsider the timeline that sounded like polite ways of saying the deal was dead, Daniel sat alone in his office as evening shadows lengthened across the city. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner tonight? You look like hell." Daniel almost smiled. Trust his brother to be brutally honest. "Can't. Damage control. From what I heard, you need more than damage control. You need a miracle." Before Daniel could respond, Marcus appeared in his doorway. His younger brother looked concerned, the kind of worry that went deeper than business. "Jennifer went home crying," Marcus said without preamble. "The Patterson deal is hanging by a thread. And according to the gossip mill, Morrison Industries just hired someone who sounds suspiciously like your former assistant." The words hit Daniel like ice water. "What?" "Executive Operations Manager. Big promotion, better salary, corner office 3 blocks from here." Marcus settled into the chair across from Daniel's desk. "Word is she's already making waves over there, implementing systems, streamlining processes, the whole 9 yards. Daniel tried to process this information. Alicia was working 3 blocks away. Alicia was succeeding, thriving, moving up in the world while his own world fell apart. "Good for her," he said, but the words tasted like ashes. "Is it?" Marcus leaned forward. Because while she's building her career, you're self-destructing. When's the last time you slept, ate a real meal, had a conversation that wasn't about damage control? Daniel couldn't answer, because the truth was too pathetic to voice. Since Alicia left, he'd been living on coffee and takeout, staying late at the office not because he had to, but because going home to his empty penthouse felt unbearable. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're a mess. And everyone can see it. Marcus's voice softened. Talk to me, brother. What's really going on here? Daniel stared out at the city lights, at the thousands of lives continuing their normal routines, while his fell apart. Somewhere out there, Alicia was probably celebrating her new job, maybe having dinner with her family, maybe laughing about something funny that happened at her new office. Maybe she'd already forgotten about Daniel Walker entirely. I made a mistake, he said quietly. Firing her? All of it. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. I spent 3 years taking her for granted, 3 years treating her like she was invisible. And when she made one human error, I destroyed her publicly because I was too proud to admit that the mistake was mine. What mistake? Daniel turned to face his brother, and for the first time in years, Marcus saw something vulnerable in his eyes. I changed the Patterson meeting date 3 times last week. I never told her about the final change. She was working off outdated information because I was too busy, too distracted, He paused, struggling with the admission. Too focused on not letting myself feel anything for her to communicate properly. The words hung in the air between them, a confession that changed everything. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're in love with her. It wasn't a question. Daniel closed his eyes. The truth finally spoken. I've been in love with her for 2 years, and I fired her because I was terrified that my feelings would make me weak. Instead, losing her had destroyed him completely. Pride, he discovered, was a luxury he could no longer afford. The Morrison Industries building gleamed in the morning sun, its glass facade reflecting the bustling energy of Midtown Manhattan. Daniel stood across the street, hands deep in his coat pockets, watching the steady stream of employees entering through the revolving doors. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, working up the courage to cross the street. It had been 2 weeks since his confession to Marcus. 2 weeks of sleepless nights and endless rehearsals of what he'd say when he finally saw Alicia again. 2 weeks of his brother's relentless encouragement and his own paralyzing fear. Just go talk to her, Marcus had said that morning over coffee. What's the worst that could happen? Daniel could think of several worst-case scenarios, starting with Alicia calling security and ending with his complete and utter humiliation. But doing nothing was no longer an option. His company was bleeding clients. His staff was walking on eggshells and he was slowly dying inside. He checked his watch. 8:47 a.m. Alicia always arrived at work by 8:45, a habit he'd noted but never appreciated during their 3 years together. She was probably settling into her new office right now, probably reviewing her schedule for the day with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made his life seamless. Taking a deep breath, Daniel crossed the street. The Morrison Industries lobby was modern and welcoming, all warm woods and soft lighting that made it feel more like a high-end hotel than a corporate headquarters. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, looked up as Daniel approached. "Good morning, how can I help you?" "I'm here to see Alicia Bennett. My name is Daniel Walker." The receptionist's fingers flew over his keyboard, then paused. His expression shifted slightly, not hostile, but suddenly more cautious. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, but Ms. Bennett isn't taking any meetings today. Would you like to leave a message?" Daniel felt his heart sink. She'd left instructions not to see him. Of course she had. "Could you tell her that I'd like to speak with her? Just for a few minutes, it's personal." The young man hesitated, then picked up his phone. "Miss Bennett? There's a Daniel Walker in the lobby asking to see you." A pause. "Yes, ma'am. I'll tell him." He hung up and looked at Daniel with something that might have been sympathy. "She says she's very busy today and won't be able to meet with you." "I'm sorry." Daniel nodded, forcing his expression to remain neutral despite the crushing disappointment. "Thank you." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Could you give her this?" He pulled out a small envelope from his jacket pocket, a note he'd written and rewritten a dozen times the night before. The receptionist accepted it with a professional smile. Of course. Daniel walked back to his office in a daze, the rejection stinging worse than any business failure he'd ever experienced. But he'd expected it. He'd hurt her publicly, humiliated her in front of colleagues she'd worked with for 3 years. One handwritten note wasn't going to undo that damage, but it was a start. 3 floors above, Alicia stood at her corner office window, watching Daniel's retreating figure disappear into the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the envelope the receptionist had just delivered. Her name was written across the front in Daniel's precise handwriting, the same handwriting she'd seen on countless memos and sticky notes over the years. For a moment, she was transported back to those mornings when she'd find little reminders left on her desk. Meeting moved to 10 a.m. Thank you for staying late yesterday. Or, coffee was perfect this morning. She'd treasured those small acknowledgements then. Now seeing his handwriting brought back too many painful memories. Knock, knock. Catherine Morrison appeared in her doorway, looking polished and professional in a charcoal grey suit. How's your first week going? Alicia quickly slipped the envelope into her desk drawer. Wonderfully, the team is fantastic, and I love the autonomy you've given me with the Mid-Atlantic expansion. Good to hear. I was hoping you could join me for lunch today. There's a new restaurant downtown I've been wanting to try, and I'd like to discuss some ideas I have for your role. I'd love to. After Catherine left, Alicia sat at her desk for a long moment, staring at the drawer that held Daniel's note. Part of her wanted to throw it away unread. Another part, a part she was trying very hard to ignore, was desperately curious about what he'd written. Finally, she opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just 4 lines. Alicia, I was wrong. About everything. I'd like the chance to explain, if you'll let me. Daniel. She read it 3 times, her heart racing despite her best efforts to remain calm. It was so like him. Direct, honest, no elaborate apologies or flowery language. Just the truth. Simple and devastating. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. How's the new job? Still loving it? It's perfect, Alicia typed back. Best decision I ever made. But as she put her phone away and tried to focus on the quarterly reports on her desk, she couldn't shake the image of Daniel standing in the lobby, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. The Daniel Walker she'd known for 3 years never showed vulnerability, never admitted weakness. This Daniel had looked broken. That evening, Daniel sat in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the city lights and nursing a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His phone rang, Marcus calling for the 3rd time that day. How did it go? She wouldn't see me. Daniel's voice was flat, defeated. Did you expect her to? Brother, you publicly humiliated this woman. You can't just show up and expect forgiveness because you finally figured out you have feelings. I know that. Do you? Because this isn't about your timeline, Daniel. It's about hers. She's building a new life, a better life, and you're asking her to risk all of that to give you a second chance you haven't earned. The words hit their mark. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his mistakes settling over him like a heavy blanket. So what do I do? Marcus was quiet for a moment. You prove that you've changed, not with words, but with actions. Show her that the man who fired her isn't the same man who's asking for her back. How? That's up to you to figure out. But Daniel, whatever you do, make sure it's about her happiness, not yours. Because if you're doing this to make yourself feel better about what you did, then you're still the same selfish bastard who broke her heart. After Marcus hung up, Daniel sat in the growing darkness of his apartment, thinking about his brother's words. For so long his life had been about control, about getting what he wanted when he wanted it. He'd built an empire by bending the world to his will. But Alicia wasn't a business deal to be negotiated or a problem to be solved. She was a woman who deserved better than the man he'd been. The question was, could he become the man she deserved? Outside his window, the city hummed with life and possibility, but Daniel had never felt more alone. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. The coffee shop on 5th Avenue was nothing special, just another corner cafe with mismatched furniture and the perpetual aroma of espresso and fresh pastries. But it was exactly halfway between Morrison Industries and Alicia's subway stop, making it the perfect place for her new Thursday morning ritual. She'd discovered it 3 weeks ago during her lunch break, charmed by the elderly Italian owner who remembered every customer's order and the quiet corner table that got perfect morning light. It had become her sanctuary, the place where she came to think, to plan, to simply breathe before diving into her increasingly demanding but rewarding new role. This particular Thursday morning found her reviewing quarterly projections for the Mid-Atlantic expansion, her laptop open beside a half-eaten blueberry muffin and her second cup of coffee. She was completely absorbed in the numbers when a familiar voice made her blood freeze. 1 black coffee, no sugar. And whatever pastry you'd recommend. Daniel's voice was unmistakable, even though she hadn't heard it in person for nearly a month. Alicia's fingers stilled on her keyboard, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Of all the coffee shops in Manhattan, he had to walk into hers. She didn't look up, hoping against hope that he wouldn't notice her tucked away in the corner, but luck had never been her strong suit. "Alicia!" She took a deep breath and slowly raised her eyes. Daniel stood 3 feet away, coffee cup in hand, looking as handsome and put together as ever in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But there was something different about him, an uncertainty in his posture, a hesitation that she'd never seen before. "Hello, Daniel." Her voice was carefully neutral, professional. "I didn't expect to see you here." He gestured awkwardly toward the empty chair across from her. "Mind if I—" She wanted to say yes, she minded very much. She wanted to tell him that this was her place, her peace, and he had no right to invade it. Instead, she found herself nodding toward the chair. "It's a free country." He sat down carefully, as if any sudden movement might cause her to bolt. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the small table, two people who'd shared 3 years of daily interaction, now struggling to find words. "How's the new job?" he asked finally. "Wonderful." Alicia closed her laptop, giving him her full attention despite every instinct telling her to run. "Morrison Industries values their employees. It's refreshing." The barb hit its mark. Daniel flinched slightly but didn't defend himself. "I'm glad. You deserve that." He paused, turning his coffee cup in slow circles on the table. "You always deserved better than what I gave you." Alicia studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated charm she'd seen him use on difficult clients, but his grey eyes held only genuine regret. "Why are you here, Daniel?" "I come here sometimes. To think." He met her gaze directly. "I never expected to see you, but I'm glad I did. I've been wanting to talk to you. We're talking now. Not like this. Not—" He gestured around the cafe, at the other patrons chatting quietly over their morning coffee. "Somewhere we could really talk. Have dinner, maybe?" Alicia felt her defenses slam back into place. "I don't think that's a good idea. Please." The word was soft, almost vulnerable. "One dinner, just to clear the air between us." "The air is perfectly clear." Alicia's voice was crisp, final. "You fired me. Publicly. In front of people I'd worked with for 3 years. There's nothing unclear about that." "You're right." Daniel leaned forward, his voice urgent. "I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. I let my pride and my—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "I let my fear make me cruel, and I've regretted it every day since." Despite herself, Alicia felt something crack in her carefully constructed armor. This wasn't the cold, controlled Daniel Walker she'd known. This was a man in pain, a man who looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Fear of what? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to engage. "Fear of needing someone too much," he said quietly. "Fear of what that might mean." The honesty in his voice was devastating. Alicia felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back angrily. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of him. "That's not my problem anymore." "I know." Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know I hurt you in a way that might be unforgivable, but Alicia, please, just one dinner. Let me try to explain." Alicia stared down at her hands, fighting an internal war between her head and her heart. Her head told her to walk away, to protect herself from more pain. But her heart, the treacherous organ that had never stopped loving him despite everything, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he deserved one chance to explain. "One dinner," she said finally, not looking up. "Public place. 1 hour. And if I don't like what you have to say, you leave me alone forever." "Agreed." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Tonight, there's a new Italian place on—" "I'll choose the restaurant." Alicia's voice was firm. "I'll text you the details." She started packing up her laptop, suddenly desperate to escape before she changed her mind. Daniel stood as well, hovering uncertainly beside the table. "Alicia." She looked up, and for a moment, the years fell away. For just an instant, he looked like the man she'd fallen in love with during those quiet moments in his office, when his guard was down, and she could see glimpses of the person beneath the CEO facade. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded and walked away without another word, her heart racing and her mind spinning. As she pushed through the cafe door onto the busy street, she wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Behind her, Daniel remained standing beside the empty table, watching through the window as she disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in a month, he felt something that might have been hope. But hope, he was learning, was even more terrifying than despair. 20 minutes later, Alicia sat in her office at Morrison Industries, staring blankly at her computer screen. She'd accomplished nothing since returning from the cafe, her mind replaying every word, every expression, every moment of her encounter with Daniel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Lunch today. I have news." "Can't." "Crisis at work," Alicia typed back, which wasn't entirely a lie. Having dinner with her former boss, the man who'd broken her heart and destroyed her career, definitely qualified as a crisis. Another text, this one from an unknown number. "Thank you again for agreeing to dinner. Whatever you decide, I understand. Daniel." Alicia stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. She had 6 hours to decide what she was going to say to the man who turned her world upside down. 6 hours to decide if she was brave enough to risk her heart one more time. Some conversations change everything, even when you're not ready for them to. The restaurant Alicia chose was perfect for her purposes. Small, intimate, but with enough ambient noise to ensure privacy without feeling romantic. Bistro Laurent occupied a narrow space in the village, its exposed brick walls lined with wine bottles and soft jazz playing just loud enough to cover whispered conversations. She arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table where she could see the entrance. The burgundy dress she'd chosen was professional but flattering, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for college graduation. She wanted to look successful, confident, like a woman who had moved on with her life, even if her hands were trembling slightly as she reviewed the menu for the third time. Daniel arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, scanning the restaurant until his eyes found hers. He looked different than he had that morning, less polished, more human. His usual impeccable hair showed signs of nervous fingers running through it, and he'd loosened his tie in a way that made him seem younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," he said, as he settled into the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." Alicia's honesty surprised them both. "I changed my mind 4 times on the subway ride here." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "What made you stay?" She considered the question, taking a sip of the wine she'd ordered to calm her nerves. "Curiosity, I suppose. You said you were afraid of needing someone too much. I want to understand what that means." The waiter appeared, giving Daniel a moment to compose himself as he ordered a glass of the same wine Alicia was drinking. When they were alone again, he leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes serious. "For as long as I can remember, I've believed that needing someone made you weak. My father taught me that, not through words, but through example. He needed my mother desperately, and when she left him, it destroyed him. He never recovered." Alicia felt her breath catch. In 3 years of working together, Daniel had never mentioned his parents beyond the basic biographical details in his company profile. "I was 12 when she walked out," he continued, his voice steady but quiet. "She said she felt suffocated by his love, that she couldn't breathe under the weight of his expectations. I watched my father, this brilliant, powerful man, become a shell of himself. He died 5 years later, and I swore I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me. So you decided never to need anyone." "Exactly." Daniel's fingers traced the stem of his wine glass. "I built my life around that principle. Control everything, depend on no one, keep everyone at a safe distance. It worked perfectly, until it didn't. Until you." The words were so soft she almost missed them. 3 years ago you walked into my office for your interview, and something shifted. You were so competent, so calm under pressure. You anticipated my needs before I voiced them, solved problems before they became crises. You made my life not just easier, but better. Alicia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "I was just doing my job." "No, you weren't." Daniel's eyes met hers directly. "You were taking care of me in ways I didn't even realize I needed. The perfect coffee every morning, the way you'd leave little notes with reminders that weren't just professional, but almost caring. You knew when I was stressed before meetings and would clear 15 minutes of silence in my schedule. You knew I hated eating lunch alone and would find reasons to discuss projects during my lunch hour." The accuracy of his observations hit her like a physical blow. She had done all of those things, small gestures of care disguised as professional efficiency. She'd told herself it was just good assistant work, but the truth was more dangerous. She'd been loving him quietly, carefully, in the only way she'd thought was safe. "I noticed everything," Daniel continued, "and the more I noticed, the more I realized how much I was coming to depend on you, not just professionally, but emotionally. You were becoming essential to my well-being in a way that terrified me. So you pushed me away. I tried to. I told myself you were just an employee, just someone who worked for me. But then you'd smile at something I said, or laugh at one of my terrible jokes, or touch my hand when you handed me documents, and I'd feel—" He paused, struggling with the words. "I'd feel like maybe needing someone wasn't the worst thing in the world." Alicia's heart was racing now, years of hidden emotions threatening to overflow. "But you never said anything, never gave any indication that you saw me as anything more than your assistant." "Because I was a coward." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I was so afraid of becoming my father that I convinced myself my feelings for you were just gratitude for good work. I buried them so deep that I almost believed it myself. Until the day you fired me." Daniel closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. "That morning when you made the mistake with the contracts, I saw an opportunity to create distance between us. If I could make you hate me, if I could drive you away, then I wouldn't have to face what I was feeling. You succeeded." Alicia's voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the hurt beneath it. "I know, and I've regretted it every single day since." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Alicia, I need you to know that the mistake was mine, not yours. I changed the Patterson meeting date 3 times that week and never told you about the final change. You were working with outdated information because I was too distracted by my own feelings to communicate properly." The revelation hit her like ice water. "What? I was the one who created the confusion. I was the one who set you up to fail. And then I used your mistake, my mistake, as an excuse to push you away because I was too much of a coward to face the truth." Alicia stared at him, processing this information. All these weeks, she'd carried the weight of that error, the shame of making such a critical mistake, and it hadn't even been her fault. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because admitting it meant admitting everything else. My feelings, my fears, the fact that I'd fallen completely and utterly in love with you, and was too terrified to do anything about it." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and devastating. Alicia felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of anger and hurt and something that might have been hope. "You're telling me this now because living without you has been the worst mistake of my life." Daniel's voice broke slightly. "Because I've spent the last month watching my world fall apart without you in it, and I finally understand what my father felt when my mother left. The difference is, I'm the one who drove away the person I love most." "Daniel, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to come back to Walker Enterprises or to pick up where we left off. I'm just asking you to believe that what I felt for you was real, even if I was too broken to show it properly." Alicia wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet dinner service, other couples lost in their own conversations, unaware of the seismic shift happening at the corner table. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "More than you know." "I know. You humiliated me in front of people who respected me." "I know. You made me question my own competence, my own worth." "I know." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that, whether you forgive me or not." Alicia looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time since she'd sat down, she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the stress lines around his mouth, the vulnerability he was showing her despite every instinct that probably told him to protect himself. She saw the man she'd fallen in love with, finally letting her see him clearly. The question was love enough to bridge the canyon of hurt between them? Some decisions require more courage than others, especially when your heart is already broken. Alicia walked through Central Park in the fading twilight, her heels clicking against the paved pathway, as joggers and late dog walkers moved around her like ghosts. The dinner had ended 2 hours ago, but she still felt raw, exposed, as if Daniel's confessions had stripped away layers of carefully constructed protection. She'd left him at the restaurant without giving him an answer, unable to process everything he'd told her, while sitting across from those earnest grey eyes. Now, surrounded by the peaceful shadows of the park, she tried to sort through the tangle of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. He loved her, had loved her for years. The revelation should have felt like vindication, like proof that all those quiet moments of connection hadn't been in her imagination. Instead, it felt like mourning, for all the time they'd lost, for all the conversations they'd never had, for the relationship that might have been if he'd been brave enough to trust her with his heart. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How did the dinner go? Still alive?" Alicia almost smiled despite everything. Her sister had been horrified when she'd mentioned meeting Daniel, launching into a 20-minute lecture about self-preservation and the dangers of giving second chances to men who'd already proven they could hurt you. "Still breathing," she typed back. "We'll call tomorrow. He'd better not have upset you, or I'm driving to Manhattan with Dad's baseball bat." The fierce protectiveness in her sister's words brought tears to Alicia's eyes. She had people who loved her, who valued her, who would go to war for her happiness. She'd built a good life for herself, a life filled with meaningful work and genuine relationships. So why was she even considering risking it all for a man who'd already broken her heart once? As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment she considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, she found herself answering. "Hello, I'm sorry to bother you." His voice was careful, hesitant. I couldn't stop thinking about how we left things tonight. I wanted you to know that whatever you decide, I meant what I said, about everything." Alicia stopped walking, finding herself beside the small pond where ducks glided across the darkening water. "Daniel, I need to ask you something. Anything. If I hadn't made that mistake with the contracts, would you have ever told me how you felt?" The silence stretched between them, and she could almost hear him wrestling with the honesty she'd demanded. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'd like to think I would have found the courage eventually, but probably not. I was too afraid." "That's what I thought." Alicia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of inevitable decision settling over her. "Do you know what the hardest part of loving you was? Tell me." It wasn't the secrecy or the professional boundaries, or even the hopelessness of it all. It was watching you lock yourself away from everyone who cared about you. Your brother, your colleagues, me. You were so determined to be invulnerable that you made yourself unreachable. I know. And now you're asking me to trust that you've changed. To believe that the man who was too afraid to tell me he cared is somehow ready for the kind of relationship I need. Daniel was quiet for so long that Alicia wondered if the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "You're right to doubt me. I have no proof to offer you except my word, and I know how little that's worth right now. But Alicia, losing you didn't just break my heart. It broke something fundamental in me. It made me realize that I wasn't protecting myself by staying distant. I was slowly dying." She could hear the truth in his voice, the pain that matched her own. But truth and change were different things. "I've built a new life, Daniel. A good life. I have a job I love, colleagues who respect me, a future that's entirely my own. You're asking me to risk all of that for the possibility that you might be different now." "I'm not asking you to risk anything," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to let me prove that I can be the man you deserve, not as your boss, not as someone who holds power over your career, but as someone who loves you enough to do the work of becoming worthy of your love." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in their implications. Alicia felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she stood beside the pond, watching the last light fade from the sky. "How?" she whispered. "However you'll let me. Dinner again next week if you want. Coffee at that little place on Fifth Avenue. Conversations where we both tell the truth instead of hiding behind professional courtesy. Time to prove that I'm not the same coward who hurt you." Alicia thought about Catherine Morrison, who'd built her company on the principle that people deserved second chances when they'd proven they could learn from their mistakes. She thought about her parents, who'd weathered their own storms and emerged stronger because they'd chosen to fight for each other instead of giving up. She thought about her own reflection in the restaurant window earlier, the face of a woman who'd survived heartbreak and emerged more powerful than before. "One condition," she said finally, "anything. We start over, completely. Not as boss and assistant, not as two people with a painful history, but as two people getting to know each other for the first time. I won't be responsible for managing your fears or fixing your emotional wounds. If we do this, we do it as equals." "Yes." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Yes, absolutely. And if you hurt me again, Daniel, if you run scared or pull away or make me feel like I'm asking for too much, it's over. Forever. I won't survive another heartbreak like the last one. I understand." Alicia took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no way of knowing if there was solid ground below or an endless fall. "Coffee," she said. "Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. That cafe on Fifth Avenue. I'll be there." After she hung up, Alicia remained by the pond for a long time, watching the ducks settle in for the night. and trying to quiet the war between hope and fear raging in her chest. She'd just agreed to give her heart to the man who'd already broken it once. She could only pray that this time he'd prove worthy of the gift. 3 miles away, Daniel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, phone still clutched in his hand, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. She'd said yes, not to forgiveness, not to picking up where they'd left off, but to the chance to start something new. It was more than he'd dared to hope for, and less than he wanted, but it was a beginning. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man who'd spent his entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of risk, this kind of vulnerability. In 48 hours, he would sit across from Alicia Bennett not as her former boss, not as someone seeking absolution for past mistakes, but as a man hoping to win the heart of the woman he loved. The thought terrified him. It also, for the first time in months, gave him something to live for. Sometimes the greatest courage is not in falling, but in choosing to trust someone to catch you. The cafe on Fifth Avenue felt different on Saturday morning. Gone was the weekday rush of business professionals, grabbing quick coffee before meetings. Instead, it hummed with the lazy energy of weekend life. Couples sharing newspapers, friends catching up over leisurely brunches, children coloring at corner tables while their parents sipped lattes. Alicia arrived 5 minutes early, claiming the same table where they'd unexpectedly encountered each other days before. She wore jeans and a soft cream sweater, her natural curls loose around her shoulders, looking more relaxed than Daniel had seen her in years. But he could see the tension in the way she held her coffee cup, the careful composure that suggested she was as nervous as he felt. "You came," she said as he approached, and there was something almost surprised in her voice. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Honestly? Part of me hoped you'd get scared and disappear. It would have made everything simpler." Daniel settled into the chair across from her, studying her face. Without the armor of professional attire and formal distance, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and heartbreakingly beautiful. "I've spent the last 3 days terrified," he admitted, "but not of you and not of this. I'm terrified of myself, of the possibility that I'll somehow find a way to sabotage this before it even begins." "That's honest." Alicia took a sip of her coffee, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "So tell me something I don't know about you. Something that has nothing to do with Walker Enterprises or business or the professional Daniel Walker the world sees." The question caught him off guard. For so long, his identity had been completely intertwined with his work, his success, his carefully constructed public persona. Being asked to reveal something personal felt like being asked to undress in public. He paused, then forced himself to continue. "I have terrible insomnia, have had it since college. Most nights I end up reading until 3 or 4 in the morning because I can't quiet my mind enough to sleep." "What do you read?" "Poetry, mostly. Frost, Dickinson, sometimes Pablo Neruda. I know it sounds ridiculous coming from someone who spends his days negotiating million-dollar deals, but there's something about the rhythm of good poetry that helps calm the noise in my head." Alicia's expression softened. "It doesn't sound ridiculous at all." "What's your favorite poem?" Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. "You'll laugh. I promise I won't. She Walks in Beauty by Byron. I memorized it in high school and, well, I've thought about it a lot over the past 3 years." Understanding dawned in Alicia's eyes, and she looked down at her hands. "Because of me. Because of you." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. "Every morning when you walked into my office, I'd think of that line. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. It seemed to capture something about you that I couldn't put into words." "Daniel, your turn," he said quickly, deflecting the intensity of the moment. "Tell me something I don't know about Alicia Bennett." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in weeks. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was little. Elementary school specifically. I used to line up all my dolls and stuffed animals and conduct elaborate lessons on everything from basic math to the importance of sharing. What changed? Reality, I suppose. Teaching doesn't pay much, and I had student loans to consider. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to follow that dream instead of taking the safe path." "You still could. Teach, I mean. It's not too late. Maybe." She traced patterns on the table with her finger. "That's one of the things I've realized since leaving Walker Enterprises. I spent so much time managing your life that I forgot to really live my own. The new job at Morrison is wonderful, but it's still just a job. I want to find something that feeds my soul, not just my bank account." They talked for 2 hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or board meetings. Daniel learned that Alicia sang in her church choir, that she made the world's most elaborate birthday cakes for her nieces and nephews, that she'd once spent an entire vacation in Italy without speaking a word of English just to see if she could navigate by intuition alone. Alicia discovered that Daniel had taught himself to cook during the pandemic, that he donated anonymously to literacy programs throughout the city, that he'd never owned a pet because he was afraid of loving something he might lose. "That's the pattern, isn't it?" Alicia said gently. "You protect yourself from loss by never letting yourself have anything worth losing. It's worked for 37 years. Has it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been living half a life." The words hit their mark. Daniel looked around the cafe, at the couples holding hands across small tables, at the families laughing together over shared meals, at all the messy, complicated, beautiful connections he'd spent his life avoiding. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be in love without being terrified. I don't know how to need someone without feeling like I'm going to disappear." "Nobody knows how to do it perfectly," Alicia replied. "Love isn't something you master like a business strategy. It's something you practice every day until it becomes natural. What if I'm not good at it? What if I hurt you again without meaning to? Then you'll apologize, and we'll figure out how to do better next time. That's what people who love each other do. They forgive, they learn, they keep trying." Daniel reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why are you giving me this chance? After everything I did, everything I put you through, why are you here?" Alicia was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "Because I've been in love with you for 3 years, and love doesn't just disappear because someone hurts you. It changes, it gets complicated. It sometimes gets buried under anger and disappointment, but it doesn't disappear. And because I believe people can change if they want it badly enough. The question is, do you want it badly enough?" Daniel finally bridged the gap between them, covering her hand with his. Her skin was warm, familiar, and he felt something in his chest unlock at the simple contact. "I want it more than I've ever wanted anything in my life," he said. "I want to be the man you fell in love with, the man you deserve. I want to learn how to love you without fear, how to need you without losing myself. Then we'll figure it out together." "Together?" Alicia turned her hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. "Together. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, one choice at a time. No promises except that we'll be honest with each other, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands linked across the small table, both of them aware that they were crossing a line from which there would be no easy return. Around them, the cafe continued its weekend rhythm, but they were lost in their own bubble of possibility. "So what happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now we finish our coffee," Alicia said with a smile that lit up her entire face. "And then maybe you can show me that Italian restaurant you mentioned. I'm curious to see if your cooking skills extend to ordering in Italian. They don't. I'll probably embarrass myself completely." "Good," she laughed. "I like you better when you're a little embarrassed. It makes you human." As they prepared to leave, Daniel helped Alicia with her coat, his hands lingering briefly on her shoulders. She turned in the circle of his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held cautious hope. "Daniel?" "Yes?" "Thank you for being brave enough to tell me the truth, even when it was hard. Thank you for being brave enough to listen." And as they walked out into the bright Saturday afternoon hand in hand, both of them knew they were stepping into something that would change everything, something beautiful and terrifying, and absolutely worth the risk. 6 months later, love, it turned out, was not a destination but a daily choice, one they made over and over again. The rooftop garden of Daniel's penthouse had been transformed. Where once there had been sterile furniture and architectural plants chosen for their low maintenance, now there were herb gardens in mismatched pots, string lights twisted through a pergola Alicia had insisted they build together, and a small reading nook where 2 chairs sat close enough for quiet conversation. On this particular evening in late October, the city sparkled below them as Alicia sat cross-legged on a cushioned bench, grading papers from her weekend volunteer teaching program at the community center. Red pen marks dotted the stack beside her, but her smile suggested the work brought more joy than frustration. Daniel emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs, moving with the easy domesticity that had developed over months of learning to share space, share life, share the 1,000 tiny decisions that made up a relationship. "How are the essays coming along?" he asked, settling beside her and handing her a mug of tea, chamomile with honey, exactly the way she liked it. Beautifully. Listen to this one. Alicia picked up a paper covered in careful 10-year-old handwriting. My hero is my mom because she works 3 jobs and still makes me pancakes on Sunday mornings. She says love is in the little things, not the big ones. Smart kid. Brilliant kid. They all are, really. I wish you could meet them. Maybe I will, if you think it would be appropriate. Alicia looked at him with surprise and delight. You'd want to? I'd want to see anything that makes you light up the way you do when you talk about teaching. 6 months ago, such an offer would have been unthinkable. The old Daniel had compartmentalized his life so rigidly that work stayed at work, personal stayed personal, and never the two should meet. This Daniel, the one who'd learned to cook her favorite Ethiopian dishes, who'd driven her to Brooklyn for family dinners, who'd sat through Maya's pointed questions with admirable patience, understood that loving someone meant embracing all the pieces of their world. How was your day? Alicia asked, settling back against his shoulder in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Challenging. The Henderson project is finally back on track, though. Catherine Morrison and I had lunch to discuss a potential partnership between our companies. How did that go? Better than expected. She's sharp and she seems to genuinely respect what you've built over there. Daniel paused, then added with a self-deprecating smile, She also told me I was an idiot for letting you go, in approximately those words. I like her more and more. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle to life as darkness settled over Manhattan. It had taken months to reach this easy intimacy, months of difficult conversations and careful vulnerability, of learning to fight fairly and forgive quickly. There had been setbacks. Daniel's instinct to withdraw when things got too intense had resurfaced during their first real argument, sending him into a 3-day spiral of silent treatment that had nearly ended everything before it truly began. Alicia's protective walls had slammed back up when he'd cancelled a dinner with her family at the last minute for a business emergency, convinced that he was reverting to his old pattern of putting work before relationships. But they'd learned to recognize these moments of fear for what they were, echoes of old wounds, not indicators of future failure. They'd learned to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, to choose each other even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "I have something for you," Daniel said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "It's not my birthday. Do I need a reason?" He pulled out a small wrapped box, not the size or shape of a ring box, which relieved and disappointed Alicia in equal measure. They'd talked about the future in general terms, but neither was ready to rush toward marriage just because they'd found their way back to each other. Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny book with pages that actually opened to reveal an engraved inscription: "She walks in beauty, D.W. Daniel." Alicia's voice caught as she traced the small charm with her fingertip. "I know it's not much, but I wanted you to have something that reminded you of how I see you. Not just when you're dressed up for dinner or when everything is perfect, but always. When you're grading papers with ink on your fingers, when you're singing off-key in the shower, when you're arguing with me about the proper way to load a dishwasher. You load the dishwasher wrong, I know, but I love that you tell me so." Alicia held out her wrist, and Daniel fastened the bracelet with hands that were steadier than they'd been 6 months ago. His fingers lingered on her pulse point, still amazed that he was allowed this, the simple intimacy of touching her, of being close enough to feel her heartbeat. "I love you," she said softly, words that had become easier with repetition, but no less meaningful. "I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Even when I steal the covers? Especially then. Even when I leave coffee grounds in the sink. I've learned to find it endearing. Even when I cry at commercials about reunited families. Those commercials are specifically designed to make people cry. You're just responding appropriately to emotional manipulation." Alicia laughed, the sound bright and unguarded in the crisp autumn air. "You've become much more romantic than I expected. I've had a good teacher." They were interrupted by the soft chime of Daniel's phone, a text from Marcus. "Dinner Sunday. Elena wants to meet Alicia properly. Also bring wine. The good stuff. Your brother wants us to come to dinner this weekend," Daniel said, showing her the message. "I'd like that. I want to get to know him better, and Elena seems lovely from what you've told me." The ease with which she accepted the invitation, the way she naturally included herself in his family plans, still filled Daniel with quiet wonder. For so long, he'd lived as an island, careful to maintain distance even from the people who loved him. Now, watching Alicia text Maya about picking up wine for Sunday dinner, He marveled at how seamlessly she'd woven herself into every corner of his life. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "How different everything is. 6 months ago I ate dinner alone every night, worked until midnight, and convinced myself I was happy. Now I can't imagine going back to that life. Even if something happened between us, which I hope it never does, I wouldn't want to go back to being that closed-off person. You've changed me in ways that have nothing to do with whether we're together." "Good," Alicia said firmly, "because that version of you was miserable, even if you didn't realize it. I realize it now." A comfortable silence settled over them again, the kind of peaceful quiet that only came with deep familiarity. Alicia returned to her grading, occasionally reading amusing passages aloud. Daniel opened his book, a collection of Mary Oliver poems Alicia had given him, and read by the soft light of the string lights they'd hung together on a rainy Saturday afternoon. As the evening grew later, and the city settled into its nighttime rhythm, they made their way inside, moving through the routines that had become precious in their ordinariness. Alicia made tea while Daniel fed the small succulent garden she'd established on the kitchen windowsill. They discussed plans for the weekend, debated the merits of a new restaurant they'd seen reviewed in the Times, and argued good-naturedly about whose turn it was to choose their next Netflix series. When they finally settled into bed, Alicia curled against Daniel's side with her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. These were the moments she treasured most. Not the grand gestures or passionate declarations, but the quiet intimacy of shared sleep, of trust deep enough to be vulnerable in unconsciousness. "Daniel, do you think we would have found our way to each other eventually, even if you hadn't fired me?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "I'd like to think so. But honestly, I was so determined to keep you at a distance that I might have spent years convincing myself my feelings weren't real. It took losing you to make me brave enough to face the truth. Maybe that's how it was supposed to happen then. Maybe we both needed to be broken a little before we could be whole together. Maybe. But I still wish I'd been brave enough to tell you how I felt before it came to that. We can't change the past. We can only choose what we do with the present." "And what do you choose?" Alicia lifted her head to look at him, her dark eyes serious in the dim light filtering through the bedroom windows. "I choose this. Every day, I choose this. The good days and the difficult ones, the easy conversations and the hard ones, the moments when loving you feels effortless, and the moments when it requires everything I have. Even when I'm impossible? Especially when you're impossible. That's when you need love the most." Daniel pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I choose this too. Every day. For as long as you'll have me. That might be a very long time. I'm counting on it." As sleep began to claim them both, Alicia thought about the 10-year-old who'd written about love being in the little things. The child was right, she realized. Love wasn't in the grand gestures or the perfect moments. It was in the daily choice to stay, to try, to believe that two imperfect people could create something beautiful together. It was in learning to trust again after being broken. It was in choosing courage over fear, again and again, until it became habit. It was in this, the quiet sanctuary of shared breath and intertwined dreams, the promise of tomorrow made real in the simple act of staying. Outside their window, the city never slept, millions of stories unfolding in the glow of endless lights. But inside this room, in this bed, in this fragile and precious space they'd built together, there was only peace and love, always endlessly, gratefully. Love. Would you have made the same choice Alicia did? Sometimes the greatest risk is trusting someone who's already hurt you, but sometimes that risk leads to the most beautiful transformations. What did this story teach you about second chances and the courage to love again? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.